He married her on a Tuesday because his father's will said a Lomax could not hold Cedar Rise a single acre past his 30th birthday unless he held it with a wife, and Everett Lomax's 30th birthday was that Friday. There was nothing tender in it, and he did not pretend there was. He rode into the town of Cedar Rise, found the schoolteacher who had lost her post when the county cut the school's funds, a plain, straight-backed woman named Louisa Pryor, who was packing to leave on the next coach with nowhere to go, and he laid it out to her over the counter of the mercantile like a stock trade. "I need a wife by Friday, or I lose the only thing my father left me," he said. "You need a roof and a place. From the look of those trunks, I'm offering a marriage on paper. You'll have your own room, your keep, and my word that I'll never trouble you. When the ranch is safe and the year's turned, if you want out, I'll see you set up honest somewhere and no shame on you. That's the whole of the bargain. I won't dress it up." Louisa Pryor looked at him for a long time, a tall, unsmiling man with a jaw like a fence post and grief worn into him somewhere she couldn't yet name. And then she looked at her trunks and at the coach that would carry her to a city where a dismissed spinster schoolteacher was worth exactly nothing, and she said, "I'll want it in writing, that the room is mine and the door has a lock." "Done," said Everett. "And I don't cook for a man who won't speak at his own table." "I'll speak," he said, though from his face it was plain he thought it a poor trade for her. They were married Thursday by the circuit judge with the mercantile owner and his wife for witnesses, and Everett kept every letter of the bargain. He gave her the big bedroom that had been his mother's, and took the narrow one off the kitchen for himself. He did not touch her, did not court her, barely looked at her. He rose before light and worked Cedar Rise from dark to dark. It was too much land for one man, and always had been, which was why his father had died in the middle of it. And he came in at night gray with exhaustion, and ate what she set before him, and said his few words, and went to his cold, narrow bed. Louisa watched him. She had spent her life watching people, reading the ones who wouldn't be read, and she saw what Everett Lomax could not say, that he was killing himself for a piece of ground because it was the only thing his hard, dead father had ever trusted him to keep, and that he expected no help and would ask for none, and that he had married a stranger because it was easier than admitting he could not do it alone. She did not stay in her locked room. She was not built for idleness, and she had never in her life eaten bread she hadn't earned. Within a week, she had the neglected kitchen garden turned, and the henhouse mended, and the account books, which Everett kept in a shoebox in no order at all, set straight in a ledger in her fine schoolteacher's hand. Within a month she could tell him, tapping the ledger, that the mortgage note at the Cedar Rise Bank came due in October, that the herd would not cover it at current beef prices, and that if he sold the North Hay Meadows cutting to the freight line's mule teams instead of feeding it all out, they'd close the gap with room to spare. Everett stared at the ledger, and then at her. "My father never let anyone in that box. Your father died in a hay meadow, with a note he couldn't pay," Louisa said. "I'd like us to do better." He heard the us. She watched him hear it. He didn't answer, but the next morning he cut the north meadow for the mule teams, and something between them shifted a quarter inch, the way a great stone shifts before anyone sees it move. The accident came in the second month, on a bright, hard morning in the horse corral. Everett was breaking a young gelding, a rangy blood bay with a mean streak, because a broke horse was worth 4 times a green one, and every dollar mattered now. Louisa was hanging wash on the line when she heard the thud and the silence after it, the silence that is worse than any scream, and she dropped the wet sheet in the dirt and ran. He was down in the churned mud of the corral, and he was not moving, and the bay was standing off in the corner blowing hard. Louisa was through the rails and on her knees beside him before she'd drawn a full breath. His eyes were open. That was something. But his face was gray and slick and wrong, and when she said his name, he said, through his teeth, "Can't feel, my legs won't." And she saw the fear come into a man who she had never once seen afraid. She did not scream, and she did not freeze. Her father had been a country doctor before the drink took him, and she had been his unpaid nurse from the age of 9, and her hands knew what to do before her mind caught up. "Don't move," she said, low and hard and certain. "Everett, look at me. Don't move your neck. Don't move your back. Not an inch. Can you feel this? She pressed his boot. His face crumpled with relief. Yes, I feel it. Then it isn't cut through. It's the small of the back. It's swelled, and it's pressing, and swelling goes down. She was already tearing her apron into strips, already sending the terrified stable boy for the fence rails and the door off the tack room. She braced his back straight with her own hands, while the boy pried the door free, and the two of them, a schoolteacher and a 14-year-old, rolled Everett Lomax onto that door in one flat, unbroken piece, the way you move a man whose spine you will not gamble, and carried him to the house, and did not let him bend once. The doctor from Cedar Rise came the next day and confirmed what her hands had already told her. The back was cracked low, but the cord was whole. And if the man lay flat and still for 2 months and let it knit, he might walk. And if he moved too soon, or gave up and let his legs go to waste, he might not. 2 months flat, Everett repeated, when the doctor had gone. He was staring at the ceiling, because he could stare at nothing else. The note's due in October. There's a herd to move and hay to bring in, and the bank won't wait because a man fell off a horse. His voice was flat and dead. Sell it. When I'm able to sign, sell Cedar Rise, pay off the note, and go on to your city like you wanted. I can't hold it flat on my back. My father was right about me in the end. Louisa set down the basin she was carrying. She came and stood over him so he had to look at her. No, she said. Louisa. I said no. You listen to me now, Everett Lomax, because I've listened to you feel sorry for yourself for exactly as long as I intend to. Her voice did not rise. It only got harder and clearer, the schoolteacher's voice that had quieted rooms of restless children. You are not going to sell this ranch flat on your back, and you are not going to lie there and let your legs wither because a dead man told you were worthless. I have read your books. I know this land better than the bank does. You will lie still and heal, and I will run Cedar Rise until you can stand up and run it yourself, and I will not hear another word about quitting under this roof. That was not in our bargain, but I am amending it. I did not marry a quitter. I won't have started. He was quiet a long moment. You didn't marry anything, he said bitterly. You married a paper. Then I'll make the paper hold, she said, and she meant it so plainly that he had no answer. She ran Cedar Rise. There is no other way to say it. Louisa Pryor, who 2 months before had been a dismissed schoolteacher packing to leave, put on Everett's dead mother's work boots and rode into town and hired 2 out-of-work cowhands, brothers named Wick and Cly Harmon, on the promise of a fair wage from the meadow money. They balked at first at taking orders from a woman. She let them balk exactly once. Then she counted out their week's pay in silver on the corral rail, told them she'd match any wage in the county, and expected any day's work in return, and asked whether they were men who could take a straight deal from whoever offered it, or whether they'd rather ride back to town and be proud and hungry. They stayed. By the 2nd week they were tipping their hats to her, and by the 3rd, they were calling her ma'am and meaning it. She rode to the Cedar Rise bank herself, and sat across from the banker, a soft-handed man named Purvis, who had already begun sizing up the Lomax acres for the day the note went unpaid. He smiled at her the way men smile at a woman who has wandered into business by mistake. Louisa laid her clean ledger open on his desk, turned it to face him, and walked him line by line through the meadow money, the fall grass, the mule team contract, and the beef the herd would bring, until his smile had gone somewhere else entirely. She talked him into 30 days' grace on the strength of numbers he could not argue with, thanked him for his time, and left him staring at a ledger kept better than his own. Then came the norther. It swung down off the mountains 3 days before roundup, a black wall of wind and sleet, and it would have scattered the herd into the breaks and cost them 1/3 of the beef the note depended on, a thing that would have ruined a grown man, and did, that same week, ruin 2 other outfits down the valley. Louisa did not wait for it to pass. She put the Harmon brothers on the best horses, took the 3rd herself in Everett's own oilskin coat with the tails dragging past her boots, and rode into the teeth of the storm. All night, the 3 of them worked the edges of the panicked herd, turning the leaders, holding the drift, their hands frozen to the reins, and Louisa learned to read cattle in the dark the way she'd learned everything, fast and by need. By gray dawn they had the herd bunched in the lee of the North Ridge, and had lost 11 head where they might have lost 300. She came in, caked in ice, could not feel her feet, and slept 2 hours before she was up doing the accounts. When she told Everett the count that night, flat on his back and helpless and listening, he turned his face to the wall so she would not see what it did to him, that a woman he'd married for a signature had ridden out into a killing storm to save the ground his father died on. Every night she came in filthy and aching and sat by Everett's bed and read him the day, the count, the weather, the price of beef, the small doings of the Harmon brothers, because a man flat on his back needs to feel he is still holding his land, even when another set of hands is doing the holding. And she nursed him. She turned him every few hours through the night, so his skin wouldn't break down, and rubbed life back into his legs with camphor liniment, and her strong hands so the muscle wouldn't waste, and made him work his feet 100 times a day against her palm, counting aloud like a schoolmarm at her sums, until he growled that he wasn't one of her pupils, and she answered that he was worse, because a pupil at least did his lessons. She propped him up to eat when he wanted to lie and sulk, and read to him in the lamplight from the few books the house held, and sat with him through the black 3 in the morning hours, when the fear got its claws in, and he was certain, cold certain, that he would never stand again, and had cost her everything for a cripple's ranch. She bullied him through those weeks, the way she'd have hauled a stubborn child across a river, by simply refusing to let go. When he raged at his helplessness, she took it and gave it back level. When he went silent, she talked enough for both of them. And slowly, without either of them marking the day it happened, the paper marriage filled up with something real. He watched her come in, worn to the bone from his land. Her land now. They both knew it. And he stopped seeing the plain schoolteacher he'd bargained with over a counter, and started seeing the strongest, steadiest, most stubbornly loyal person he had ever known. And the seeing broke something loose in his chest that had been locked since his father died. "Why?" he asked her one night, the October note paid and safe, the danger past. "You could have sold it and been shut of me and gone. Why break yourself over a man who married you for a signature?" Louisa was quiet, folding a cloth. "Because the first honest thing anyone ever offered me was your bargain," she said. "You didn't lie to me. Everyone else in my life dressed up what they wanted and called it kindness. You told me the plain truth over a mercantile counter, and you kept every word of it." She looked at him. "And because somewhere in here I stopped running your ranch to save your ranch, and started running it to save you. I didn't plan on that. It happened anyway." He stood up 8 weeks to the day, holding the bedpost and then her arm, his legs shaking under him like a new colt's, and the first thing he did with his own feet under him again was turn and take both her worn, work-hard hands in his. "I've got a thing to say and I'm bad at it," Everett said. "So I'll say it plain, the way you like. I married you to keep the ranch. I want to stay married to you to keep you, not the paper, you. I don't want you set up honest in some city. I want you here, in the big room, and me no longer in the cold one off the kitchen, if you'll have a man who was too proud and too broke and too much his father's son to see what walked into that mercantile until he was flat on his back looking up at her." His voice roughened. "You wouldn't let me quit on the ranch. Don't let me quit on this." Louisa Pryor, who had refused to let the grave or the bank or his own dead father have him, put her hand against his unshaven jaw. "I amended the bargain, remember," she said. "This part I mean to keep for good." They kept Cedar Rise, the two of them, and made it pay in a way one man alone never could have. But it was not the land that Everett Lomax counted his fortune by, in the end. It was the plain-spoken woman who had knelt in the mud and would not let him die, would not let him quit, would not let him sell himself short. The wife he had married for an acre and got a whole life from, and the sound of her ledger pen and her sure step in a house that was, at long last, a home to them both.